Patrick Mahomes peaked in the 2022 season, League MVP, Super Bowl MVP, and another 5,000-yard year.
Open, wide open for the touchdown.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Super Bowl 57 quarterback Patrick Mahomes, Kansas City.
Ever since then, even though the Chiefs had stayed competitive, it seems like he's gotten worse year over year, leading to Pat's worst year last season even before the torn ACL, which ended his season right then and there. The Chiefs season basically died with him, but the reaction across the league wasn't shock. It was almost a sense of relief. Like people had been waiting for permission to say what they've been thinking for 2 years, that Patrick Mahomes is washed. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, if Patrick Mahomes is washed, why is everybody still so scared of the Chiefs before the 2026 season? But let's start with the 2022 season, because after that, that's when things get really hairy. He put up 5,250 yards with 41 touchdowns and only 12 picks. That was an MVP season during his first year without Tyreek Hill, and somehow Mahomes looked better than he ever had before. That's the version of him that got tattooed into the public consciousness, and it's the guy people think of the second they hear his name. But that was the peak. In 2023, he finished with 4,183 yards and 27 touchdowns, which was a drop of over 1,000 yards and 14 scores from the year before. He still won the Super Bowl and Super Bowl MVP that year, but the counting stats took a real hit. Then 2024 rolled around and he hit 3,928 yards and 26 touchdowns. The Chiefs went 15-2 that year, but their franchise quarterback kept producing less and less. And it didn't help getting blown out in the Super Bowl to the Eagles either. In 2025, he was at 3,587 yards and 22 touchdowns through 14 games before the knee injury ended things. If you extrapolate those numbers over a full season, you're still looking at his lowest total touchdown as a starter. 3 straight years of decline isn't just a slump. A slump lasts for 6 weeks, but this is a trend of a downward turn. The situation gets even uglier if you watch the film instead of just reading the box score. His deep ball accuracy on 20 yards down the field sat close to 48% back in 2020. That was elite production at the top of the league, but in the last few seasons, that number's dropped into the 30s. The guy who used to make your jaw drop on 60-yard bombs is suddenly missing routine passes he used to make with ease. Yards per attempt tells the same story. Back in his peak years, Mahomes averaged 8.1 yards every time he dropped back to throw. Last season, that number was down to 7.1, which means they were just moving the chains and nothing more. There's one specific stat that actually fools people if you aren't paying attention. His completion percentage has gone up from 62.7% in his MVP year to over 67% recently. That sounds like improvement, but it's actually a little misleading. He's completing a higher percentage of his passes because the average throw has gotten dramatically shorter. If you throw the ball 5 yards instead of 15, you're gonna complete more of them. That isn't his accuracy getting better, it's the offense shrinking around him. Then you have the sack rate, which has crept up every single year as the protection in front of him has shifted. He's been forced to hold onto the ball longer while looking for guys to get open downfield who just aren't winning their routes anymore. When you put all of that together, you understand exactly why the wash label has stuck. These numbers all point in one direction, but the thing is, numbers without context is just noise. The why behind the drop-off actually starts with the trade that the Chiefs made before Mahomes actually won the MVP that 2022 season. Tyreek Hill left for Miami, and for 1 year, it didn't really matter because Pat was so locked in that he carried the entire offense on his back anyway. But you have to look at what Hill actually provided for the system. He wasn't just a fast guy out there. He was the easy button for the entire team. On 3rd and 8, Mahomes could just throw it up and let Hill run under it for a first down. Or if the defense played too far off, Pat would hit him on a quick slant and watch him turn it into a touchdown before the safety could even react. You didn't need a complex scheme back then. You just needed a big arm and a green light to let it rip. Once you take Tyreek out of the equation, you're left leaning Patrick Mahomes to actually read coverages and find the open man instead of just trusting his weapons to bail him out. That's a completely different skill set, and honestly, it's not one he's ever really had to lean on during his career until now. Which leads us to the situation with Travis Kelce. Even after Hill was gone, Mahomes still had his ultimate release valve in the middle of the field. Travis would line up in the slot and run option routes that were basically uncoverable because he knew exactly where the soft spot in the zone was going to be every single time. However, Travis isn't 27 anymore, and he's not creating the same kind of separation he did back in 2020 when he was putting up over 1,400 receiving yards. He's still a smart player who finds ways to get open, but he's not the unstoppable force he used to be, and he's transitioned into being a good tight end rather than a dominant one. When you take those two weapons away, with one being traded and one aging out of his prime, you have to rely on yards after the catch because nobody's getting open downfield. Kansas City has led the league in yards after the catch as a share of their total yards for 4 of the last 5 seasons, which isn't an accident or even really a strength. It's actually what happens when your quarterback can't push the ball vertically anymore. So the offense has to compensate by getting easier completions and asking guys to make plays with the ball already in their hands. The tape doesn't lie, and you can watch the touchdown length shrink from right alongside the numbers. Back in 2019, the average touchdown pass traveled over 17 yards in the air, but in recent years, the number has fallen to under 4 yards. Pat isn't throwing deep bombs into the end zone like he used to, and instead, he's flipping the ball to a guy at the goal line and letting him walk in for the score. Then the 2025 season piled on top of all those existing issues. Rashee Rice was the only legitimate slot weapon they had, but he was suspended for the first 6 games. And Xavier Worthy was a speed guy meant to be the next vertical answer until he got hurt in week 1. During the exact year Mahomes needed his receiving room to actually step up the most, he barely had anyone healthy enough to take the field. But the part of this equation that doesn't get talked about enough is actually the coach. Andy Reid is now the longest tenured coach in the NFL with one team with the Kansas City Chiefs for the past 13 years. He's produced 3 Super Bowl rings and multiple playoff appearances. His leadership is the main reason none of this Mahomes decline has actually sunk the ship. Think about what Reid has actually done when he has a quarterback who can't push the ball down the field like he used to. He doesn't fight the reality of the situation, and instead, he builds the entire system around it. He simplifies the reads for Patrick, gets the ball out of his hands quickly, and calls a game that hides the exact weaknesses we just talked about. You don't see Pat being asked to take 5-step drops and diagnose a disguised coverage anymore, because the scheme focuses on quick games and option routes to get the ball out before the deep ball limitations even matter. That's elite coaching, and it's the result of 20 plus years of knowing exactly how to make a quarterback look better than he actually is. Then you have Steve Spagnuolo on the other side, who might be the most underrated defensive coordinator in the league right now. If you look at the Chiefs' defense during the regular season, the pass rush numbers often look pedestrian and don't really jump off the page to you. Then December and January hit, and somehow this defense finds a way to get stops when the game is on the line. Between the disguises and blitzes coming from angles nobody expects, a defense that looked average in October suddenly becomes a reason the team is hoisting a trophy in February. That's not just luck, it's a coordinator who understands exactly when to turn the dial up to 10. Chris Jones is the anchor that makes his whole defensive unit work. Now look, if you watch every single snap, it doesn't look like he's always had the same relentless motor that he had a few years back. There are definitely some plays where he's not exactly sprinting to the echo of the whistle, but he's still commanding double teams on nearly every down and remains the guy opposing coordinators game plan around first. Even a slightly less explosive version of Chris Jones is still drawing double teams and enough attention to free up everybody else on the defensive front. What makes this coaching combination different from almost anybody else in the league is the sheer amount of high-level experience they have together. They've been through 3-peat attempts and blowout losses on the biggest stages, and they've adjusted through both Super Bowl wins and total disasters. Every single time they hit a wall, they find a way to reload their approach instead of blowing the whole thing up, and that kind of continuity is incredibly rare in the modern NFL. Compare that stability to the rest of the AFC West, and you'll see exactly why the Chiefs stay on top. The Raiders are still hunting for any kind of coaching and QB consistency while they cycle through names to find the right answer. And the Broncos went through the same thing for many years before finally settling into something that works. I don't ever count the Chargers as real threats. Meanwhile, the Chiefs have had the exact same brain trust running the show for over a decade, which is a massive advantage in January. When your competition is starting over every 2 or 3 years and you're not, you're going to win games regardless of what your quarterback's yards per attempt look like in week 9. But great coaching only takes you so far without the right players executing the plan, and that's where the draft history becomes important to the story. Every dynasty needs a draft class that serves as the blueprint for the future, and for Kansas City, that was the 2022 group. The Chiefs grabbed Trent McDuffie at pick 21 and George Karlaftis at pick 30, which gave them 2 defensive building blocks in the same round. McDuffie was the one that raised eyebrows on draft night because the Chiefs traded up to get him, and they kind of gave up a lot of capital that most teams wouldn't part with for a corner outside of the top 15. That move turned out to be one of the better decisions this front office has ever made though. Karlaftis has been just as reliable on the edge, racking up over 60 pressures in each of his last 3 seasons. While it isn't a flashy stat that trends on social media, it is exactly what you want from a guy taken at the end of the first round. You aren't necessarily expecting a superstar at that draft slot, but you do expect a reliable piece who shows up every single week. That's exactly what they've been getting from him on the defense. The 2022 class didn't stop with those 2. They also landed Brian Cook at safety, Leo Chenal at linebacker, and Jalen Watson at corner. When you add Isaiah Pacheco at running back to that list, you realize they found 4 more contributors in one single draft while they're right in the middle of stacking Super Bowl runs. That isn't just a good draft class, it's a home run that most front offices only see once in a decade if they're lucky. And on the offensive side of the ball, even more so, this era gave you Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith, who became superstars on their rookie contracts and have held down the fort on the offensive line for years. When people talk about why Mahomes has survived the decline in the weapons around him, part of the answer is that the middle of his line has been rock solid because the team drafted specifically to build depth at premium positions. Now look, not every class since then has hit quite like that one did. The 2023 draft gave the Chiefs Felix Azumo in the first round, and by any measure, that pick has been a bust so far. The 2024 class was also pretty thin outside of Xavier Worthy. However, the 2025 class brought some real promise back into the pipeline for the future. Josh Simmons looked like he could be a franchise left tackle for the next decade. Omar Norman-Lott was also flashing real disruption on the interior before a season-ending injury cut his rookie year short. Nobody's arguing that Brett Veach hits on every single pick he makes. That isn't how the draft works for anybody. The point is that he hits often enough on premium positions like corner, D-line, and offensive line to keep replacing pieces that age out or they trade or leave in free agency. That's how you sustain a run. And so you have elite coaching and a pipeline that keeps refilling itself, but none of that answers the real question everybody is actually asking. Does Mahomes himself still have it when the lights are the brightest? Josh Allen is 5-1 against Patrick Mahomes in the regular season, but if you flip that to the playoffs, he's actually the exact opposite at 0-4. We're talking about 4 different years, 4 different Bills rosters, and 4 different chances that all resulted in 0 wins for Buffalo. That gap between the regular season record and the playoff record isn't just a footnote. It's basically the entire argument for why the fear factor hasn't gone anywhere. It isn't just Buffalo struggling with this either. Lamar Jackson's one of the most explosive quarterbacks in football on any given Sunday in the regular season. But he's walked into January against this defense and walked out looking like a rookie who's never seen a disguised coverage before. Steve Spagnuolo and his defense have made it a habit out of taking away exactly what Jackson wants to do, which forces him into throws he doesn't want to make, and Baltimore still hasn't figured out the answer when the games matter the most. Then you have to look at the 2023 run, where Patrick had to go to Buffalo and Baltimore on the road. Winning an AFC Championship game in Baltimore in January is an environment that is supposed to be unbeatable for a road team. No other quarterback from this era has ever done anything close to winning back-to-back road playoff games against that level of competition on a way to a back-to-back title. Even in the disaster that was the 2025 season, where every stat is already declining, Mahomes still found a way to rally his team to overtime wins when the roster around him was falling apart. He had weapons suspended, players getting hurt, and an offensive line that was constantly being shuffled. But he still found a way to steal games that a lesser QB would have lost outright. The eye test tells us that the fear factor was never really about the stat sheet in the first place. Nobody's actually scared of yards per attempt or completion percentages. What people are truly scared of is what happens when the light get the brightest and the season's on the line. Until somebody actually beats him in January instead of just outgaining him in week 9, none of that is going to change, which leads us to the teams that are supposed to be closing the gap. Baltimore has one of the best rosters top down in the entire league, and Lamar has the MVP hardware to prove that he's the real deal. But the talent on paper does not change what actually happens when these two franchises meet in the games that matter the most. Kansas City has owned the biggest matchups between these teams for years now, and until that changes, it doesn't matter how good the Ravens looked in November. Buffalo is the team that people usually point to as a real threat. That's not a crazy argument to make. Josh Allen gets better every single season, and the roster around him is built to win right now. But we do have to look at that head-to-head number again, because Allen dominating the regular season and coming up empty every time in the playoffs is the elephant that never leaves the room. You can improve all you want in October, but it doesn't matter if you keep losing to the same team in January. Then you have Denver and the Chargers in the division itself. Both of those rosters are trending up, and Denver just made it to the AFC Championship game. But neither one of them has the championship pedigree, and neither one has the coaching continuity that Kansas City has been running for over a decade. You can build a good roster in 2 or 3 years, but you can't just manufacture that kind of experience overnight. You also can't forget about the reigning AFC champions either, and the Patriots, who just traded for AJ Brown and aren't going anywhere anytime soon. All of these teams have one thing in common though, their off seasons were all the same. They were building around the fear of running into the Chiefs in January, assuming this team somehow found its way back into the tournament. Nobody's scared of Kansas City on a random Sunday in the fall, but everybody's scared of them in the only games that actually decide anything. The front office keeps giving contenders more reasons not to relax. And nobody knows exactly what version of Patrick is showing up this season after the injury, or if his explosiveness is ever actually coming back. That uncertainty is its own kind of weapon because defenses have to prepare for every version of him. From the declining one to the one who can still steal a Super Bowl on one good foot. That's the tension sitting at the center of this whole conversation. You have a quarterback whose numbers say he's declining. He's coming off a major injury, and there are question marks all over the roster. Somehow, nobody in the AFC actually wants to be the team that they face, though, in January. The stats show that Mahomes has slipped, but until somebody actually beats his coaching staff and this culture when it matters, that fear isn't going anywhere. So there you have it. Watch this next video if you haven't already, and subscribe if you're new. Thanks for watching.